Amen. Well, talk about reaching people. What I want to do tonight is I want to talk about the translation of the Bible and how a good translation really helps us deal with life in an honest fashion. And what a lot of people don't realize is that there are so many verses that can be translated legitimately grammatically more than one way. Just like in Greek, for many, many verbs, the passive voice and the middle voice of the form of the verb it is exactly the same. And so you have to determine from the context which it is. And sometimes the context is kind of tough, and it makes the difference between that which happens to you and that which you do to yourself. And the same thing is true in the way different words are translated. We could go into all kinds of verses about this. The two I want to focus on tonight are Philippians 4:13 and Romans 8:28. Philippians 4:13, traditionally translated, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Romans 8:28, traditionally translated as everything or all things work together for good for those who please God. Those are both actually sort of, depending on the text you choose, legitimate translation of the verses. But when you and I are dealing with life, and that's primarily, the Bible is a book of guidance about how to deal with life, how to please God, how to relate to each other, how to be genuinely blessed, what is the truth of things, what is not the truth. And I know in today's world, we hear the phrase, well, my truth is. And I hope you understand the definition of truth enough to realize that there's no such thing as my truth, because we can't determine anything. We're actually quite weak, quite powerless. We can't determine the day of our death. I planted some peas recently in my garden. I can't make them grow. If between the water and the bean and God, if they don't grow, that's kind of the end of that. I can't go in there and make them grow. We humans are quite powerless in the situation. And so learning to rely on God and learning how to make sense of the scripture, these things are really important. So I'd like to start in Philippians 4, verse 13. And Philippians 4:13, traditionally, as I said, is I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Frankly, if everybody who quoted scripture read and paid attention to the context, and if they understood the meaning of words, like how all doesn't mean, all in the whole universe, but can refer to a limited set of what all is. I can do all things is not a horrible translation. The problem is when you take that translation, I can do all things, you divorce it from its context, and you put it in a 21st century culture where we humans, it's like beat your chest, I'm the great human being, you deserve this, you can do this, and that type of thing. And what it does is it divorces the text from what it's really trying to say. Now, if we just simply start with the context, you go to Philippians Chapter 4, and, before we even get started in reading a verse, we look at Philippians and we say, where was Paul? Well, Paul was in prison in Rome, and I'm sure that all of you likely know that. When Philippians is a prison epistle, Paul was a prisoner in Rome. Now, this is a little known fact, but in the early 70s, it's so long ago now, I'm not even exactly sure. It's either 72 and 73 or 73 and 74, but I ran a fellowship in the Federal Penitentiary for Women in Raleigh, North Carolina. every Friday night for about 2 years, we would go to the federal prison and I would run a fellowship. That was a complete mismatch. I was a total nerd, and most of these ladies had not completed high school. It's amazing they hung in with me. But in any case, the one thing I can tell you about every one of those ladies was all of them. If I said, you can do anything, what would you like to do? What would you say the number one thing that they would say they'd like to do was? Yeah, get out. Absolutely. Number one thing, get out. And they counted the days. They knew exactly how many more days they had in that prison. You know, so if Paul's in prison and he's going to write, I can do all things, then it's like, wait a minute, Paul, then why aren't you walking out of there? So we already know we can't do all things, but you know, most people, when they read the scripture, they're not reading it very deeply. And frankly, a lot of times we go to the scripture because we need help. We need a word of encouragement, and those are good things. I mean, those are great things. And sometimes when you're feeling down and you want a little, you know, pep or push or bump, you know, I can do this. I can do all things. And then you're, of course, talking about your immediate circumstance. One of the things that does, unfortunately, is it trains us as readers not to pay attention to the context. Because when we're importing ideas into the text that don't belong there, we'll see the same thing in Romans 8 in a minute. When we import ideas into the text that don't belong there, like I can do all things through Christ, then all of a sudden the context is like, it doesn't make any sense. And so we say, well, we don't understand the context anyway. We just go ahead and read what we want to. I like a good one that comes up in a lot of your Bible study books. Well, not Bible study books, but the scholarly books about truth and translation is when Jacob and Laban are parting from each other, and Jacob's running off with, in Laban's mind, Jacob's running off with his daughters and stuff. And he says, you know, the Lord watch between us when we are parted one from another. And, you know, then you get people and they have a little thing that's cut in half, a little silver thing that's cut in half with this on it. And it's like, that was a curse. You know, Laban was mad at Jacob and didn't want him coming back and taking anything else. So he put up a curse. The Lord watch between us. You know, in other words, the Lord is going to be the one that's going to wreak vengeance if you come back here. And so you get these people, and you know, is it a curse in and of itself? No, thankfully, or everybody who wore one of those things would be wearing a curse. But that's what it was in the context. So let's go to Philippians chapter 4, and we're going to start in verse 10. So Paul's in prison, and one of the things you'll see here is the grace and largesse of Paul, because he says in verse 10, I rejoice in the Lord greatly that now at last your concern for me has blossomed again. And what does this mean? It means Paul's finally receiving money from the church at Philippi. For a long time, for whatever reason, and the reason is unstated in the scripture, but for a long time, the Philippian church, the church of Philippi, had not financially supported Paul. Now they were. He's in prison. He needs the money. And so he rejoices that their concern, i.e. their money, has blossomed again. And then watch how he downplays this. He says, indeed, you were concerned before, but you lacked the opportunity to show it. Probably not. I mean, they could have scrounged up something. You know, I mean, you know, it's not like the church had nothing. Now, we do know they were going through some hardships. There's no question about that. I'm not saying they were rich. The scripture, particularly in 2 Corinthians, makes it clear they weren't rich. But I'm sure they could have given something. But look how gracious Paul is here. This, see, when we're reading the Bible, I call them mini lessons. When we're reading the Bible, where mini is M-I-N-I, you know, tiny lessons. And this is a tiny lesson, which is, you know, even if you feel a certain way about it, just be gracious. And here's Paul being gracious, being kind to the church. You lack the opportunity to show it. And verse 11, and this is legitimate, and I think this is true when he says, verse 11, I'm not saying this because I'm in need. And he was. Let's get it. Paul was chained to a soldier. He was in Rome in a hired house. He had to pay the money for that house. They could put him in prison for free, but if he wants to be in a house, unless somebody's given it to him, they're having to pay rent. They're having to buy their own food. So they need money. So Paul is saying, I'm not saying this because I'm in need, even though he was. For I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I'm in. Well, wait a minute. If he can do anything, I can do all things, then why is he in these circumstances? See, if you translate this and understand it as I can do all things, like a bravado, a chest beating, then it flies in the face of the context. And what happens then is the readers, and when I say that, I think about me this summer, teaching my 14-year-old grandson the Bible, and how little he understood, and how he had to just be handheld through so many things. And I went and had you can probably tell, went and had my haircut late last week. And the haircutter lady was a Christian woman, and we started to talk about the Bible, and she started to talk about, just motor mouth about all the things about the Bible she didn't understand. And, there were so many things that, and I didn't want to get into this huge theological discussion. So I gave her some pointers, wrote down some things for her before I left. But the average Christian just isn't trained to read the context, put the context together. So here he says, I've learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am in. That's another mini lesson or tiny lesson. The Bible tells us in Timothy that if we have food and shelter, let's be content. The whole advertising industry is built on making you discontent. The entire advertising agency, look, if you were content with what you had, you wouldn't buy anything else. So the whole advertising agency is geared to make you feel bad about what you have. Your phone isn't good enough. Your house isn't big enough. Your car isn't powerful enough, or doesn't have enough fancy gadgets, or your clothes aren't stylish enough, or whatever it is. And Paul writes and he says, look, I've learned in whatever circumstances I'm in, then I'm content. And that's a great mini lesson for us, a tiny little lesson to learn to be content, because the more content we are, the more money we'll have in our pocket. That's huge. So he says in the next verse, verse 12, I know what it is to have little, and I also know what it is to have an abundance. And Paul really did. There were times when he says, he was naked, he was hungry, he went without sleep, that kind of thing. Paul says, I know what it is to have little. And by the way, when we're talking about incongruity with what is commonly taught in some places, I used to believe in and basically part of the Word of Faith movement, you have faith and you receive, you believe something and you receive it, that kind of thing. Boy, I just can't think of anybody else on the planet that would have had more faith than the Apostle Paul. If faith brought you abundance, why in the world is Paul writing, I know what it is to have little? Because he of all people would have an abundance. And then James writes, God has chosen the poor of this world to be rich in faith. Well, wait a minute. That's an incongruity. If faith brings abundance, then how can the poor of the world be rich in faith? That makes zero sense. See, our trust in God doesn't bring us abundance. Hard work brings us abundance. Prayer can help bring us abundance. Using wisdom can help bring us abundance. But simply sitting around and trying to have faith for abundance doesn't bring abundance. And this is just, as we put together fundamental truths, the word should make sense. So Paul says, I know what it is to have little. And I think I know I do, and I trust many of the faces I see you guys do too. I also know what it is to have an abundance. And there were times when Paul had great abundance. I'm sure, for example, when he was teaching in Ephesus for 2 years and 3 months, and all Asia heard the word of the Lord Jesus, there would have been all kinds of offerings and gifts pouring into Paul's life. And I guess most of them by now are certainly gone. And then he says, verse 12, in any and every situation, I have learned the secret to being content, whether well-fed or hungry, whether in abundance or need. Whoa, this is pretty cool. Okay, now we get out our pens and our pads, because Paul has just said, I have learned the secret to being content, whether well-fed or hungry, whether in abundance or need. And I'm like, okay, what's the secret? What's the secret? And then he's going to tell us in the next verse, I have strength. The Greek word is ischouo, and it means strength. Although it gets translated can do, and it can in cases be used in an active sense, here it's much better used as a passive of what Paul has. If I read some Bible versions, the New American Bible says, I have the strength for everything. I have the strength for everything. If we look at Young's literal translation of the Bible, for all things I have strength in Christ's strengthening me. So this isn't about I can do. What does Paul need to stay in prison, chained to a soldier with a positive attitude? He needs mental and strength. He needs endurance. In fact, there's a version, see if I can find it real quick here. Yeah, the Common English Bible translates this, I can endure all these things through the power of the one who gives me strength. And that's really what this is about. And so much of life, and I say this laughing because I'm thinking of my life right now and the things that I've recently put up with in remodeling and all kinds of things. Even this morning, Genevieve was saying, our hot water heater is turned down too low. Can you turn up the hot water heater so the water's a little hotter? And I'm like, sure. I've turned up the temperature on a lot of hot water heaters. So I go to the hot water heater, and it has a big sign and says, don't change the temperature on the hot water heater unless you turn off the power. Then change the temperature and put the power back on. So the electricians, when they installed the water heater, it installed this little power box. And I opened it up. I could not figure that thing out to save my life. I absolutely could not get the power off to that water heater. Thankfully, by happenstance, I happen to have an electrician coming next week. So I'll ask him to show me how to turn off electric to the hot water heater. But there's just so many little things in life we have to endure. It's just like, you're kidding, really? That kind of thing. You go out to your car when you're in a hurry, you have a flat tire, or, all the weird stuff that just happens. And he says, Paul, I've learned the secret to being content. And what is it? Verse 13, I have strength for all situations in union with him who empowers me. Who's doing the empowering? Christ is. What's my situation? I have strength for this. I can endure this. I can make it through this. I can do the best I can in this situation. And why can I do that? Because I'm in union with Christ, and he empowers me. See, this is a title shift. It's either I can do, or it's, I have strength for all situations because I'm in union with Christ who empowers me. And if I call it kind of relaxing into pain, relaxing into anxiety, where you're in a situation that you don't want to be in, then you just take a deep breath and, okay, Lord, you and I, we're going to get through this. I don't have to pull myself up by my bootstraps and bully my way through a tough situation. I can be I can draw on the strength that I have because I'm in union with Christ, and he's the one who's going to empower me. And you think about Paul's situation. I'm sure there were times when, especially in his second Roman imprisonment, this first Roman imprisonment was, frankly, from Paul's experience, a fairly gentle one. He was in his own hired house. He was chained to a soldier, but I'm sure he was well fed and he got a good night's sleep, that kind of thing, as best you can, chained to a soldier. But it was his next imprisonment where he's in a Roman dungeon, where they're cold, it's dark, there's no latrines, they stink like crazy. You're thrown in with gosh knows how many people all crammed into this little, basically what amounts to like a large well that they just lower you down into. If you've ever been to Rome and seen the Mamertine prisons, it's very incredibly sobering that Paul would be in a place like that. And yet, what's the testimony of the scripture? That he never abandoned the faith. And he writes to Timothy, the time of my departure, the time of my death is at hand. I'm being poured out as a drink offering. And there's not one thing in Timothy, 2 Timothy, about, I'm really mad about this and I wish it hadn't happened and I can't believe the Romans are doing this to. None of that's in 2 Timothy. What do you see in 2 Timothy? You see what you see right here. You see it. I've learned how to be in need. I've learned how to be content. I know what it is to have little. I know what it is to have an abundance. I've learned the secret to being content, whether I'm well-fed or hungry, whether I have an abundance or a need. I have strength for all these situations. That's the Common English Bible, isn't it? I can endure all these things. I have strength in all these situations in union with the one who empowers me. And I love that. And I think that if we would glue that on our refrigerator and make up songs about that, rather than, I was even singing it today. I've been going over Philippians so much. Today I was walking around going, and I'm singing the song, I can do all things. And I'm thinking to myself, will you quit that? It just kind of stuck in my head. But anyway, Paul is saying, I have strength for all situations in union with him who empowers me. And then verse 14, and I love this because you don't want to leave the Philippians feeling like you're unthankful for their gift. Somebody gives you something, you never want to leave them feeling unthankful. So even after he says, I know what it is to have little and an abundance, and I've learned the secret to being content, and I have strength for all situations. Verse 14, nevertheless, you've done well to share with me in my affliction. And that's exactly, the way we should relate to other people, with great kindness, with generosity. So focus, really the take-home message from here is translations matter. Our attitudes after we read a translation matters. And to have the attitude, I have strength for all situations. Why? In union with him who empowers me. That's a great thing to walk away with. Okay, let's take a breath, and we'll surface over in Romans 8. And I want to focus on another verse that I think gets translated contra to the way that the context is showing it. This is a little different because it involves some textual variations, but you are familiar with, I'm sure, the most popular way to translate Romans 8:28, which is all things work together for good for those who love God and who are called according to his purpose. If you look at the REV of Romans 8:28, or if you have an NIV and you look at the NIV, and there's some other versions as well, now we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, even to those who are the called ones in accordance with his purpose. In all things, God works for the good. In the same way that the I can do all things through Christ, or I have strength for all things. The wording changes your attitude. It's the same thing here. In Romans 8, if the translation, if the actual meaning of the text, the meaning in the text is, all things work together for good for them that love God, then two things ought to be apparent pretty quickly. One is the context should support that translation. We will see that it does not. So once again, you have a mistranslation, and then what happens is it doesn't flow with the context, and it untrains people for reading and figuring out the context. And so then it leads to people proof texting or just grabbing things and living by them. So that's one thing it does. It isn't supported by the context. But the other thing is that if all things work together for good for those who love God, then I have to do some pretty serious mental gymnastics in a number of cases where something obviously is not working out for good. I have two very personal experiences with that. One was I was in Chicago and was called to give help to a man that had left the church, and the church was a church that believed that everything worked for good. And honestly, as long as you're living a good life, that verse seems to work. Here's a man, he's got a riding lawnmower. He's mowing his lawn. He's got his little son on his lap. He hits a pothole and his son goes under the mower. And the son thankfully lived, but obviously he was cut up pretty badly and he got a limb cut off. The minister came over to say, about how all things are going to work together for good. The guy threw him out of his house and said, I never want to hear from the church again. That's why I got involved, because I had the background to step in and say, look, you were taught wrong. I'm sorry about it, but God didn't do this, and this is not a good thing. You don't have to do any mental gymnastics to figure out how this is going to work out for your good. The other situation I was involved in happened when I was in seminary at Reformed Theological Seminary, and there was a lady, single mom. She had one daughter, an only daughter. The daughter was standing out by the street to get the bus in the morning, and a lady who had been drinking all night long swerved and hit and killed her, and drove off actually with her coat in the grill of the car. And again, the church showed up, and this, if we just stay faithful, this will work out for good. And basically, the lady said the same thing: get the heck out of my house, get off my lawn. And again, these are extreme examples, but it shows you, gosh, guys, I'm 70 years old. I look around, just like with Rob, you prayed tonight for younger people. I look around at most of us are older. I know you've got probably, if you were to sit down with a piece of paper, you've probably got dozens of incidents where things did not work out for good. I've got some that are very close to my heart. That didn't work out for good. And thank God I know the translation of this verse, because if I had to sit there and do the mental gymnastics to figure out how this stuff that isn't good was somehow or other good, I no wonder there, I ran it the last couple of weeks, run into a person that just very blatantly up front, I hate God. And she did. And she talked about what had happened to her and figured that God could help her. And she wasn't in a place where she was open to any kind of discussion. But, we're not talking about something that happens in, dusty theological buildings. This is stuff that happens on the street, and the mental gymnastics that we don't want to have to do. But how comforting it is to know, Romans 8:28, now we know that in all things, it doesn't matter what kind of junk you're going through, in all things, God is on your side. In all things, God works for the good of those who love him, even to those who are the called ones and according to his purpose. Now I don't have to do any mental gymnastics to make a horrible thing somehow or other good. Instead, I just have to understand that God didn't cause that horrible thing, and he was doing his best in the situation to work for good in it. Now, I talked about the context. Let's go to the context of Romans 8 here. And we're gonna back up, and let's start in verse 18. And this is what I mean when I say, when you have a bad translation, then it detrains you to pay attention to the context, because verse 18 starts out with, for I maintain that the sufferings of this present time. Whoa, wait a minute. What? The sufferings of this present time. I thought, how could they possibly be sufferings? If God engineered all this pain to be to our advantage, then it's not really suffering. It's like growth pains or something. I mean, for God here to call it suffering right in the context would tell us there's something wrong here. This is bad. And so he says in verse 18, the sufferings of this present time aren't worthy to be compared with the glory that's about to be revealed in us. Oh, what are we talking about? Oh, we're talking about our new bodies. We're talking about the millennial kingdom. We're talking about the time when, like the Old Testament prophecy says, everlasting joy will chase us down. We're talking about the time that Revelation 21 talks about when it says, pain and sorrow shall be no more. So if suffering is actually allowing God to do good things to make us better, then it would logically continue. It would have started in the Garden of Eden. It would continue forever. The fact that there was no suffering in the Garden of Eden, and there won't be any suffering in the eternal kingdom of Christ and of God in Christ, tells you that suffering is a bad thing. So here we go with the context. Suffering is a bad thing. And then what's happening, by the way, in verse 19? I love verse 19 because it is so unanticipated. Because if we simply read it, and I'm going to read it in the REV, which we worked very hard on the translation of, because it really is an important thing. It says, for the eager anticipation of creation is waiting expectantly for the children of God to be revealed, which of course will happen for us at the rapture. But it's interesting that it doesn't say the creation is waiting expectantly. That's actually what's happening. It's the creation that's waiting expectantly. But what's coming in the future is so exciting that even the eager anticipation of the creation has to wait, which is just, to me, it's just an amazing thing. And it's a very unique, eye-catching or ear-catching way to explain how exciting it will be in the future when we get our new bodies and things are great. And then verse 20, for the creation. Okay, that's the whole creation. We're not talking about just human beings here. We're talking, look at the animal world. It's the kill or be killed, or eat or be eaten. The animals suffer horribly. The plants, plants are, they crowd each other out and they do all kinds of things. So verse 20 says, for the creation was subjected to futility. Good grief. Do all things work together for good? The whole creation was subjected to futility. Well, how did that happen? It says not willingly. God's creation did not say, we animals, we plants, and we humans, we all want to suffer. We will willingly go into a great time of suffering, of futility. No, that's not what happens. The creation was subjected to futility. Why? Not willingly. They were dragged into it because of the sin of Adam and because Adam gave dominion to the devil. It says, but because of the one who subjected it, who's the devil, not God. And that's why 1 John 5:19 says the devil holds sway over the whole world, why he's called the God of this age. And 2 Corinthians 4:4, the prince of the power of the air, other terms that are given to the devil. So what happened? The devil subjected God's creation to futility, and they didn't go willingly, but the devil was now the master. Thank you, Adam. Described in Luke 4:6, by the way. But the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of the one who subjected it. In the hope, verse, and remember there's a parenthesis, so they were waiting for the children of God to be revealed, verse 19, in the hope, verse 21, that the creation itself will also be freed from its slavery to decay. Does that sound wonderful? No, it's not wonderful. It's horrid. And it doesn't work together for good. It's a horrible thing that happened to God's creation because of the sin of Adam. But even in that sinful situation, God is working for the good. And that's what we see from Genesis until Christ comes back and conquers the earth in Revelation 19. We see this huge battle between good and evil, that God is working in these horrible situations. So until the creation itself will be freed from its slavery to decay and brought into the freedom of the glory of the children of God, because Christ didn't just redeem mankind, Christ redeemed God's creation in toto. He redeemed the whole creation, and that creation will one day in the future be reestablished as a glorious creation. So verse 22, for we know that the whole creation has been groaning together and suffering the pains of childbirth together right up to this present time. And again, why is there a groaning? Because there's really evil and horrible things going on. In verse 33, and not only that, but we ourselves also, who have the first fruits of the Spirit. Gosh, we should be so blessed to have the first fruits of the Spirit. But it says, even we ourselves keep groaning within ourselves, eagerly waiting for our adoption. I am. I trust you are too. I'm eagerly waiting the time that Christ comes back and I get my brand new body, and my adoption into the family is fully completed, fully mature. The redemption of our body. And that's why it says in verse 14, in other parentheses, for we were saved, though only in the hope. In other words, yeah, we're saved, but right now it's a hope, because we still die and get sick and all these horrible things happen. But hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what he sees? Verse 25, but if we hope for what we do not see, then we wait expectantly for it with patient endurance. And that's what we do. We wait expectantly with patient endurance for the Lord to come back. Then verse 26, moreover, in the same way, the Spirit, that's Jesus Christ, joins in to help with our infirmity. For we don't know what we need to pray for, but the Spirit himself, because Jesus Christ is a him, the Spirit. And by the way, in the New Testament, once Christ was raised from the dead and had a new spiritual body, then he's called the Spirit. That's one of the names of Jesus Christ. He's called the Spirit because he makes, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us along with groans too deep for words. And this is pretty interesting, because now if we put this together in verse 22, we know that the whole creation has been groaning together. And then in verse 23, even we ourselves keep groaning. And then in verse 26, Jesus Christ intercedes with us with groans too deep for words. So the devil's rule over God's creation has produced so much pain and so much suffering that the creation itself is groaning. You and I, even though we have a promise of the hope and have the Spirit, which guarantees our everlasting life, we groan. And Jesus Christ, who loves us and who cares for us, and we're part of his body, he's groaning too. And why is everybody groaning? Because the devil's the god of the world, and he's made everything a mess. And there are people that are suffering and suffering horribly because of what's going on. And so verse 27, then he who searches the hearts, that's God, knows what is the mind of the Spirit, Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ, he makes intercession for the holy ones according to the will of God. God continues to reveal, what needs to happen. Then verse 28. So now we've come to verse 28. Where's the flow of the context going? Well, there's suffering back in 18. The creation is waiting for Jesus Christ to come back. The creation is groaning. We're groaning. Christ is groaning. And what can Christ do? Verse 26, he can pray for us. And we know prayer is important, but we're still here in this mess. And so now in verse 28, all of a sudden, is the scripture going to say that everything works together for good? How in the world could it do that? That flies in the, if everything's especially for Jesus Christ, if everything's working together for good, why is Jesus Christ groaning? He of all should look down and go, guys, hey, chill out. Believe me, this is good, a good thing. May not feel good, but it's a good thing. And he's not up there doing that. He's up there groaning along with the creation and us. And so now what do we need to know as a word of comfort? What's going to help us? Is it going to help us to try to do some kind of mental gymnastics to figure out, well, evil is good and good is evil? You know what the prophet says, woe to you who call evil good and good evil. You know, here, now we have a translation. I saw it first in the NIV many years ago, did the work behind it to make sure they were right, which of course they did a great job. And so really our translation basically mirrors the NIV. Now we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, even to those who are the called ones in accordance to his purpose. Wow. Thank you, God. This life is tough. It wasn't your fault that Adam handed it over to the devil, but this life is tough. And it's comforting to know that in every situation, you are on our side and you are working for the good. And how do we know that? Because verse 29, those whom he foreknow, he decided in advance would be transformed into the image of his son, so that they would be the firstborn among many brethren. And he decided them in advance, verse 30, he called them. And if he called them, he declared them righteous. And if he declared them righteous, he glorified us. That's coming in the future. And what are we to say these things? If God be for us, who can be against us? Because God didn't even spare his own son, but gave him for us. A painful thing to do, but it sure blesses us right now. And we look forward to a great hope. So that's what I wanted to share tonight. If we have a proper translation, then two things are going to accrue. One is it's going to fit with the context, and it will help people understand the context, and it will help Bible students learn to recognize how the context can help with the interpretation of the verse. And the second thing it will do is it will produce a comfort and a truth as you live it out in the world. It won't end up going against the things that you actually experience in your day-to-day life. So thank you so much for being with me tonight. This has been a blessing to share this. I think these are important truths and they need to be shared, and we need to be able to help people out so they can understand the word and get the comfort that's here in these verses and others like them. So thank you so much.